Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about Nicholas Harbor and his decision to not go to the Olympic trials and to start getting ready for the South Carolina football season. Very excited about that as a college football fan. Definitely something that I want to see on the field is Nicholas Harbor as much as you can possibly give him to me. So that's going to be awesome to watch. But to stock up, stock down. We're going to do this throughout the rest of the week. We did the SEC yesterday, got into a couple of teams that I really like going into the next little bit, and a couple of teams that, whether it's circumstantial or just where they are right now, I don't necessarily love over the next couple of years. But let's get into the Big Ten. There's a ton to break down. Michigan and Ohio State, I'm not touching. They're at the very top. Oregon, I'm not necessarily touching because I don't necessarily know where they fit in this entire world of the Big Ten quite yet. And also, they're likely towards the top anyway. But let's get into this and break down a couple of teams that I'm watching, and it starts with Nebraska, if I'm being totally honest. I don't think it could start really anywhere else. This team has a lot going for it this upcoming year, and this year could be a huge springboard for this team getting back into the national spotlight where they haven't been in quite some time. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens, but from talent acquisition to hype, they have something totally different than they've had in the past, especially under the past regime. It felt like the talent level was just the talent level, and it never really changed. It didn't really, continue to take steps up. Every single year that Matt Rule's been, well, it's only been 1 year, but they've only gotten better on the talent perspective and definitely bringing in the right guys. So very much like what they're doing. I think the guy that everyone's watching, the guy that everyone is going to zero in on, is Dylan Raiola. I apologize for that. He is a super talented kid, and he heads to Nebraska to essentially be their future. That is why he was dubbed the savior of the program, and frankly, he can be that. I'll be totally honest. He is a guy that, let's just say, over the next 3 years, he wins a Big Ten championship, goes to the playoff at least once, maybe is a Heisman finalist at the end of the day in his junior year, does some really cool things, and brings Nebraska at least a little bit more back to the national spotlight. This team is totally back. I'll be totally honest with you. If all of that comes to fruition, if this guy is exactly what Nebraska fans think that he might be, they're going to be dangerous going forward because they can capitalize on a thing that they really have a really interesting recruiting footprint because they're just kind of in the center of the country where you can extend your arm into the Midwest. You can go a little bit south, go into Texas if you want to, maybe into Louisiana. So it's going to be really interesting, and especially with playing teams like USC and UCLA, you can maybe make your way over into California a little bit to recruit as well. So it's absolutely huge what Nebraska can do over the next, I think, 2 seasons. This season is obviously huge just to give yourself a little bit better of a springboard going forward, but I think the next 2 seasons are as vital of seasons as you've ever seen in Nebraska. I think this is the chance they have to, at the very least, show everyone that they're not going anywhere. They're not going to, be gobbled up by the 4 other teams in the Big Ten that are coming in, and they're going to stand their ground and at least be a part of the conversation. I think from there, they can take off. It's just a matter of what happens over the next couple of seasons, so it'll be really interesting to see. But I think Nebraska has about as much stuff in order as you could possibly want them to have at this very moment. Some things have to happen, obviously, for everything to go the way they want it to, but right now, they're just really sitting pretty, to be totally honest. But let's move right along here, and USC is an interesting one, because this is one that really jumps out to me, but there are a lot of people that it doesn't jump out to. There are a lot of people that think they're just going to get totally gobbled up by the Big Ten and be kind of an irrelevant asset in the Big Ten in a couple of years. I don't think that way, and I think it comes back to I really believe in what Lincoln Riley is doing right now. I think he has totally changed his approach to the way that he wants to build a team, the way that he shows up to practice, the way that he deals with his players. Everything is just a little bit different. He has a certain edge to him that is just totally different than what it was at Oklahoma or even his early time here at USC. So it's going to be really interesting. But the biggest thing here for me is the recruiting patterns are very, very encouraging. They just are. There's so many things that they're doing to at the very least, attempt to become the team that Lincoln Riley wants them to be attempt to become the team that is going to beat you defensively, is going to hurt you, and is going to batter you a little bit throughout the game. Those are the teams that he wants, and he's done a good job of pulling in guys. He did lose Isaiah Gibson yesterday. He decommitted, and frankly, that guy's a Georgia Bulldog. If anyone wants some inside intel, I don't know if that had to be shared, because that's where he's going to end up. But at the end of the day, at least he's going after these guys. The goal is at all times with USC, especially over the next couple of years, just keep swinging. Take as many guys as you can on the defensive side. Some are going to decommit. Some are going to go to the big guys, because you're going to have to battle some really, really big-time players for these guys. You're going to have to battle Georgia. You're going to have to battle Alabama. All of these guys are going to be really tough to keep in your class, but the goal is to keep swinging. The goal is to pick up a couple of 4-stars and then hold on to them. And then maybe you pick up a 5-star and hold on to him. Justice Terry is still in this class. Maybe you do it with a couple more 5-stars the next time around. It's just about continuing to build this thing that you've started. Continuing to say, we are going to be a defensive team. We are going to try to batter teams, and bringing in the right guys to do that. You're not always going to win these recruitments. It is not an easy thing to keep these recruitments, especially with 2 guys on the defensive side of the ball in the state of Georgia. That's always going to be tough to do. But as long as you're swinging, you're going to do a good job. You're going to bring in a number of guys that would not have been there in the past, and likely you wouldn't have recruited in the past because they wouldn't have even thought about you. So the reality is, it's not going to be, a perfect linear path to the top, but he's making the decisions that he has to make. He hired the right defensive staff. He's doing the right things on the recruiting trail, and the offense is going to be fine. There's no two ways about that. So I think USC has the ability to really take the world by storm, not only over the next couple of years, but really next year. I think they can make some noise, and Lincoln Riley can become one of the top coaches in the country if he wasn't that already, and he was in my book, but some other people have cooled on him quite aggressively. But I love the direction of this program. I think it could go off the rails, but as of right now, it looks like Lincoln Riley means business, and he's not wavering from that one bit. So very much like this one, but it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But let's get into Maryland. This is a very, very interesting one, because both my stock down picks I just don't really like. I'll be totally honest with you. And it's not necessarily because I don't believe that they are going to slowly start to slip over the next couple of years. It's because I don't want them to slip, frankly. I like Maryland as a team. I love Mike Locksley as a head coach. I think he's done just an incredible job over there. But the reality is there's 4 new people rolling in. And all of those 4 new people likely slot above Maryland. You could make the argument that they could battle with UCLA for a little bit, but the other 3 definitely are slotted above Maryland just the second they walk through the door, which is not ideal. Maryland does not necessarily have a recruiting footprint that is special by any means, especially compared to the other guys they have around the country or around the conference. They're not going to be able to go out and get California kids the same way that obviously UNC and UCLA can, but even Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State can. They're not going to be able to necessarily pull away some of those big-time Pennsylvania guys from Penn State the way that maybe they would like to. It's not a good situation necessarily for them to really succeed in a world that is so much about talent acquisition and so much about the money that you're bringing into the program. Maryland's going to get the short end of the stick, and I wish they wouldn't, because I think there is an ability in this team where when you have someone like Mike Locksley, there's the chance that you have a 45 point per game type team and you can just score and hope that you win some games. But at the end of the day, I just think the future is not going to be overly kind to them, and I wish that wasn't the case, but don't necessarily love where Maryland's at, and I think Mike Locksley might just be a guy that I've talked about it before on this show, that there's going to be a lot of really good coaches that end up losing their jobs because there's just not enough wins to go around. This might be one of those guys, and I wish it wasn't, because he's one of my favorite head coaches in the country, but that's the way of the world right now. But the second one is kind of the same argument. Minnesota is in a spot where you just don't want to be totally honest. It's a very fun team. PJ Fleck's energy is just infectious. He's one of the most fun guys in college football, but there's just not enough wins to go around. As I just talked about, when you look at the Big Ten, there's a tier 1 with, the top level guys. There's a tier 2 with, I would say right now, at least, I would say Penn State, Michigan. Those are kind of the sort of the tier 2 teams. There's an argument to be made they're all tier 1, but at the end of the day, the teams kind of in the middle of the pack are Minnesota, Maryland, Wisconsin, Rutgers, Michigan State, Indiana, Iowa, all of those teams. Iowa's probably tier 2 to be totally fair, but all of those teams, out of those 6 teams that I just named, Minnesota, Maryland, Wisconsin, Rutgers, Michigan State, and Indiana, the 4 at the end are the 4 that I feel much more confident in than Minnesota and Maryland. I wish that I felt more confident in Minnesota, but when I look at Rutgers, I think Greg Schiano is building something there that is really interesting and absolutely can play Big Ten football and at least be a tough out going forward. Wisconsin has, in my opinion, one of the top 10 to 12 head coaches in the entire country, and Luke Fickell, I think he's going to be incredible up there. Jonathan Smith at Michigan State is just getting his feet under him and absolutely will be a player because Michigan State has that ability. And then Indiana with Kirk Cignetti, I just feel really good about what he's doing over there. I think he's going to be a pest for a very long time in this conference, if I'm being totally honest. So out of that group, Minnesota and Maryland are just in a tough spot, and I wish they weren't. I think Minnesota's going to play their football. They're not going to throw the ball around too much. They're not going to light the scoreboard on fire. They're not going to do a ton of different things. They're just going to run the ball. They're going to take their spots when they have them, but at the end of the day, that pretty much plays into what the Big Ten does. They're going to have offensive and defensive linemen that are going to be able to batter you, and Minnesota just can't match that. Let's just be totally honest. So PJ Fleck is someone that I absolutely love. I think the energy he brings to a program is unlike really anyone else in the country. I think he has the ability to be a really good head coach, but as I said with Mike Locksley, there's going to be guys that get cut because they achieve probably what they were supposed to achieve that year, but it doesn't look too good on the record sheet, and it's not something that you want to deal with as a fan. So it's going to be really interesting to watch all of this unfold. I think when I look at all of these guys that across the country really might lose their job over the next year just because it's going to be really hard to keep your job in some of these conferences, it's definitely not ideal. So I absolutely hate the stock downs in this one. Frankly, I hated doing that to those two teams because I don't necessarily hate what they're doing over there. I think there's a lot of great things happening at Maryland and Minnesota. It's just the reality of the Big Ten. You have USC, you have Washington, you have Oregon coming in, and there's not enough seats at the table. That's just the reality. So it's going to happen in the SEC. It's going to happen in the Big Ten, but we'll move on to the Big 12 and the ACC. Hopefully it's not quite as aggressive there, but it definitely still will happen over there. But we'll break those down in the coming days, but we'll take our final break here. And when we come back, we're going to get back to Wednesday What Ifs. This is kind of a segment we started last week. Would love for this to be an interactive segment, so if you have any what ifs, then drop them in the comments and I'll get them into next week's show. But I have a couple on docket for today that I want to break down that I think would be pretty fun if they did happen. So we'll break them down right after this, so stick with us.